The year was 2147, and humanity had spread its wings across the stars. Countless planets were now home to settlers seeking new lives far from Earth. Among these distant worlds was Arendor, a lush but dangerous planet covered in dense forests and towering mountains. It was beautiful, but it came with risks that no one could have predicted. Arendor wasn't just filled with strange plants and animals. It housed creatures so deadly they made even experienced hunters hesitate. One such creature was the Virak. Standing over 12 feet tall, the Virak resembled a cross between a wolf and a reptile. Its body was covered in thick, armored scales that could deflect bullets and energy blasts alike. Its claws were sharp enough to cut through steel, and its glowing red eyes seemed to pierce through anything or anyone that dared to look at it. For years, the settlers had learned to avoid the Virak. They were apex predators, untouchable, and unstoppable. No weapon could harm them, and no strategy could outsmart them. The colonists lived in constant fear of stepping too far into the forest or staying outside after dark. Stories of attacks spread quickly, keeping everyone on edge. But despite their caution, encounters still happened, and they rarely ended. Well, for humans. Jake Monroe knew this better than most. A skilled marksman and part of the colony's security team, Jake had seen his share of close calls. He was calm under pressure, quick on his feet, and always ready to protect others. His partner, Laura Hayes, admired his bravery but often worried about his recklessness. She had warned him time and again not to take unnecessary risks, but Jake didn't listen. He believed every problem had a solution if you were smart enough to find it. One day, Jake and Laura were assigned to escort a group of miners working deep in the forest. The miners needed protection while they gathered resources essential for the colony's survival. Though reluctant, Jake agreed to go along. Laura joined him, carrying her rifle and scanning the area constantly. She hated being this far from the safety of the settlement, but she refused to let Jake handle the mission alone. The forest was eerily quiet as they moved deeper inside. The air felt heavy, and the sunlight barely filtered through the thick canopy above. Every step crunched loudly against the dry leaves, making it impossible to stay silent. The miners worked steadily, occasionally glancing nervously at the trees around them. Jake kept his gun ready, his eyes darting from shadow to shadow. Then, without warning, the silence broke. A low growl echoed through the forest, sending shivers down everyone's spines. The miners froze, dropping their tools and looking around frantically. Laura raised her rifle, her voice steady but urgent. "Everyone stay calm. Back up slowly." Jake turned toward the sound, his heart pounding. From the corner of his eye, he caught movement, a flash of silver-gray fur moving between the trees. Then suddenly it appeared. The Virak stepped into the clearing, its massive form casting a long shadow over the group. Its glowing red eyes locked onto Jake, and for a moment everything seemed to stop. Panic erupted. The miners screamed and scattered, running in all directions. Laura shouted orders, trying to keep them together, but it was useless. The Virak roared, the sound shaking the ground beneath their feet. Jake didn't move. Instead, he raised his rifle and fired. The first shot hit the Virak squarely in the chest, but it bounced off harmlessly. The second shot did the same. Jake cursed under his breath, firing again and again. Each bullet ricocheted off the creature's impenetrable hide, leaving no mark. The Virak tilted its head slightly, almost as if amused by the futile attempt. "Jake, run!" Laura yelled, pulling him back. But Jake stood frozen, staring at the beast as it lowered its head and charged. At the last possible second, Jake dove to the side, rolling across the ground as the Virak thundered past him. Its massive paw swiped at the air where he'd been standing moments earlier. Breathing heavily, Jake scrambled to his feet and sprinted toward the others. Laura grabbed his arm and pulled him behind a fallen tree, using it as cover. Together they watched as the Virak sniffed the ground, searching for prey. When it finally turned and disappeared into the forest, the two exhaled in relief. That night, back at the settlement, Jake couldn't sleep. Images of the Virak haunted him. The way it had stared at him, the deafening roar, the feeling of helplessness as his bullets failed to penetrate its armor. He replayed the encounter over and over in his mind, searching for answers. How could something be so powerful, so invincible? And more importantly, how could they fight back? Laura found him sitting alone in the mess hall, staring blankly at a cup of coffee. She sat down across from him, her expression soft but concerned. "You're thinking about it again, aren't you?" she asked gently. Jake nodded. "There has to be a way," he said. "We can't just live like this, constantly afraid, constantly running. We need to figure out how to stop them." Laura sighed, leaning forward. "I get it, Jake. I really do. But what are you going to do? That thing shrugged off your best shots. If we can't hurt it, we're wasting our time." "I don't know yet," Jake admitted. "But I'm not giving up. Not until I find a way." Laura studied him for a moment, then nodded reluctantly. "Just promise me one thing," she said. "Don't go chasing after it alone. Whatever you decide to do, we stick together. Deal?" Jake hesitated before nodding. "Deal." As the days passed, Jake became consumed by the idea of finding a weakness in the Virac. He spent hours reviewing footage of previous encounters, studying their movements and behavior. He read reports written by other colonies who had faced similar threats. Slowly, an idea began to form in his mind. If conventional weapons wouldn't work, maybe something else would. He decided to visit Eli Carter, a retired engineer who lived on the outskirts of the settlement. Eli was known for tinkering with old machinery and inventing gadgets that sometimes worked and sometimes didn't. But Jake figured he had nothing to lose. If anyone could help him build a weapon capable of taking down a Virac, it was Eli. When Jake arrived at Eli's workshop, he found the man surrounded by piles of scrap metal and half-finished projects. Eli looked up, surprised to see Jake. "What brings you out here?" he asked gruffly. "I need your help," Jake replied. "I want to build something that can kill a Virac." Eli raised an eyebrow. "A lot of people have tried that. None of them succeeded." "I'm not asking for perfection," Jake said. "I just need something that can hurt it, enough to give us a fighting chance." Eli thought for a moment, then nodded. "All right, let's see what we can come up with." Over the next few weeks, Jake and Eli worked tirelessly on their project. They scavenged parts from old spacecraft and experimented with different materials until they created what they called the pulse driver. It was a handheld device designed to deliver concentrated bursts of energy, strong enough to pierce even the toughest armor. When the prototype was finally complete, Jake tested it on various surfaces: steel plates, reinforced glass, anything he could find. Each test brought them closer to success. By the time they were done, Jake felt confident that the pulse driver might actually work. All they needed now was another encounter with a Virac to put it to the test. But as Jake prepared for the next step, doubts lingered in the back of his mind. Was he truly ready for what lay ahead? Or was he chasing something impossible? Only time would tell. Ake Monroe couldn't shake the feeling that he was running out of time. Since his encounter with the Virac, he had thrown himself into perfecting the pulse driver, determined to prove that humanity could fight back against the untouchable predator. But as days turned into weeks, the pressure mounted. The settlers were growing restless, and whispers of doubt spread through the colony like wildfire. Some believed Jake's obsession with the Virac was reckless, while others saw it as their only hope for survival. Laura Hayes watched her partner closely, noticing how little he slept and how often he disappeared into Eli Carter's workshop. She admired Jake's determination, but worried about where it was leading him. "You're not thinking straight," she told him one evening as they sat together in the mess hall. "Even if this weapon works, what happens next? You think killing one Virac is going to solve everything?" Jake didn't answer right away. He stared at the table, his fingers tracing the edge of his coffee mug. "It's not just about solving everything," he said finally. "It's about proving we can fight back, that we're not helpless." Laura sighed, leaning back in her chair. "And what happens when the Virac realize we're a threat?" "They're smart, Jake. Smarter than we give them credit for. If we push too hard, they'll come after us harder." Jake nodded slowly, acknowledging her concerns. But deep down, he couldn't let go of the idea that the pulse driver might be the key to tipping the scales in humanity's favor. For years, the settlers had lived in fear, always looking over their shoulders, always waiting for the next attack. Jake wanted to change that, for himself, for Laura, and for everyone else trying to build a life on Arendor. Eli Carter shared Jake's determination, though his reasons were different. A former engineer from Earth's military R&D division, Eli had spent decades designing weapons before retiring to Arendor. He had hoped for peace on this distant planet, but the arrival of the Virak changed everything. Now working on the pulse driver gave him a sense of purpose again, a chance to use his skills for something meaningful. Together, Jake and Eli fine-tuned the prototype, testing it relentlessly. Each trial brought improvements, but also setbacks. Sometimes the energy bursts fizzled out before reaching their target. Other times the recoil nearly knocked Jake off his feet. Despite these challenges, they refused to give up. By the time the pulse driver was ready for field testing, both men felt cautiously optimistic. Word of their efforts spread quickly through the colony. Some settlers praised Jake as a hero, while others criticized him for risking everyone's safety. Tensions boiled over during a meeting in the main hall, where arguments erupted about whether to continue fighting the Virak or abandon Arendor altogether. Laura stood silently in the corner, watching as tempers flared. "You're putting us all in danger," shouted one woman, pointing accusingly at Jake. "What happens if your fancy weapon doesn't work? What then?" Jake stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "I understand your fears," he said, "but running won't solve anything. If we leave, the Virak will still be here, and sooner or later, they'll find another colony to attack. We have to stand our ground." The room fell silent as people considered his words. Finally, an older man named Frank spoke up. "Maybe he's right," he said. "We came here to start fresh, to build a new home. If we give up now, what does that say about us?" Not everyone agreed, but enough voices supported Jake to keep the project moving forward. With renewed resolve, Jake prepared for the next step, finding a Virak to test the pulse driver on. It didn't take long. Reports came in of a lone Virak spotted near the edge of the forest, far from the colony. Jake saw it as the perfect opportunity. Against Laura's protests, he decided to go alone, unwilling to risk anyone else's life. Before leaving, he checked his gear one last time, ensuring the pulse driver was fully charged and secure on his belt. "Promise me you'll be careful," Laura said, handing him a small med kit. Her eyes betrayed her worry, but she tried to smile. "And don't do anything stupid." "I won't," Jake promised, though they both knew it was easier said than done. With a final nod, he set off into the forest, disappearing among the towering trees. The journey took longer than expected. The terrain grew rougher the deeper Jake ventured, forcing him to navigate around jagged rocks and tangled roots. The air was thick with humidity, making every step feel heavier. Still, Jake pressed on, driven by a mix of fear and determination. He knew the Virak wouldn't wait forever. As dusk approached, the forest grew darker and quieter. The only sounds were the rustling leaves and the occasional chirp of nocturnal insects. Jake moved cautiously, his senses heightened. Every shadow seemed to shift unnaturally. Every sound echoed louder than it should. Then, without warning, the silence broke. A low growl rumbled through the trees, sending chills down Jake's spine. He froze, gripping the pulse driver tightly. Slowly, he turned toward the source of the noise, his heart pounding. There, emerging from the shadows, was the Virak. Its glowing red eyes locked onto Jake instantly, and for a moment neither moved. The creature tilted its head slightly, studying him as if curious about this strange human standing so boldly in its territory. Jake swallowed hard, forcing himself to stay calm. This was it, the moment he had been preparing for. Raising the pulse driver, Jake aimed carefully at the Virak's chest. His finger hovered over the trigger, trembling slightly. Then, with a deep breath, he fired. The first shot hit dead on, causing the Virak to stagger backward. Its roar shook the ground, deafening in the enclosed space of the forest. Jake's pulse raced as he watched the creature recover quickly, shaking off the impact as if it were nothing more than a minor annoyance. Before the Virak could charge, Jake fired again. This time, he aimed for its shoulder, hoping to disrupt its balance. The second burst struck true, sending the beast stumbling sideways. Encouraged, Jake adjusted his aim once more, targeting the Virak's leg. The third shot connected and the creature collapsed with a thunderous crash, writhing in pain. For a moment, Jake allowed himself to believe he'd done it, that he'd found the Virak's weakness. But as he approached cautiously, rifle raised, he realized the truth. The pulse driver hadn't killed the Virak. It had merely stunned it. The creature's movements slowed, its muscles twitching uncontrollably as if its nervous system had been temporarily paralyzed. Jake backed away slowly, keeping the pulse driver trained on the Virak. Though weakened, the beast was still dangerous. He knew better than to underestimate it. As dawn began to break, casting faint light through the trees, Jake made his way back to the colony, his mind racing with questions. When he returned, the settlers greeted him with a mixture of awe and disbelief. News of his feat spread quickly, earning him both admiration and skepticism. Laura listened quietly as others praised Jake's bravery, but she remained unconvinced. "You got lucky," she told him later, pulling him aside. "Next time you might not be so fortunate." Jake nodded, knowing she was right. But he also knew the pulse driver had proven its potential. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start, a glimmer of hope in a world that often felt hopeless. Over the following days, Jake worked tirelessly to refine the weapon, incorporating feedback from Eli and others who had seen its effects firsthand. Meanwhile, tensions within the colony continued to simmer. Some settlers urged Jake to lead a full-scale assault on the Virak, while others argued for caution, warning that provoking the creatures could lead to disaster. Laura found herself caught in the middle, torn between supporting Jake and protecting the community. She understood his drive to fight back, but she couldn't ignore the risks. "If we push too hard," she reminded him one night, "we might lose everything." Jake listened, weighing her words carefully. He knew the stakes were high, but he also believed they couldn't afford to stand still. The Virak were evolving, becoming bolder with each passing day. If humanity wanted a future on Arendor, they would have to adapt and fight just as fiercely. As the sun set over the colony, casting long shadows across the landscape, Jake stood outside, staring into the distance. The forest loomed ahead, dark and foreboding, hiding countless dangers within its depths. Yet despite the uncertainty, Jake felt a spark of determination ignite within him. Whatever lay ahead, he was ready to face it. The success of the pulse driver changed everything, and nothing. Jake Monroe had proven that a Virak could be hurt, but the victory came with complications. The settlers were divided, their opinions clashing like storm clouds on the horizon. Some saw the weapon as a beacon of hope, proof that humanity could stand its ground against the planet's deadliest predator. Others viewed it as a dangerous provocation, a spark that might ignite a war they couldn't win. Laura Hayes tried to keep the peace, mediating arguments and reminding everyone of the bigger picture. "We're not just fighting the Virak," she said during one heated debate in the colony's main hall. "We're trying to survive here. If we let fear control us, we'll lose before we even begin." But fear was hard to ignore. Stories of the Virak spread quickly, each retelling more exaggerated than the last. Some claimed the creatures hunted in packs now, coordinating attacks with eerie precision. Others swore they had seen Virak using tools, broken pieces of metal fashioned into crude weapons. Whether these tales were true or not, they fueled paranoia among the settlers. Jake listened to the rumors quietly, his mind racing. He knew the Virak were intelligent, far more so than most people realized. Their ability to adapt made them even more dangerous. Every encounter taught him something new about their behavior, their strengths, and their weaknesses. But knowledge alone wasn't enough. To truly protect the colony, they needed a plan, a strategy that went beyond individual battles. With Laura's reluctant support, Jake began assembling a team. Volunteers stepped forward, drawn by a mix of duty and desperation. Among them was Frank, the older man who had defended Jake during the meeting, and a young woman named Mia, whose family had narrowly escaped a Virak attack months earlier. Together they trained tirelessly, learning how to use the pulse driver effectively and working as a unit. Eli Carter helped too, modifying additional prototypes for the team. Each weapon was slightly different, tailored to its users' strengths. For Mia, who was smaller and lighter, Eli designed a compact version with reduced recoil. For Frank, who preferred brute force over finesse, he built a heavier model capable of delivering devastating bursts of energy. Jake tested each one personally, ensuring they were ready for the field. As the days passed, the team grew closer, bound by shared purpose and mutual trust. They practiced in the forest near the colony, simulating ambushes and counterattacks. Laura pushed them hard, drilling tactics into their heads until they became second nature. "If you hesitate out there," she warned, "you're dead. You need to act without thinking." Despite her tough exterior, Laura cared deeply about the team. She watched Jake especially closely, noticing how his confidence grew with every successful exercise. Part of her was proud of him, but another part remained uneasy. The Virak weren't just animals, they were hunters, predators that thrived on chaos and fear. Provoking them further carried risks she wasn't sure they were prepared for. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the team gathered around a campfire outside the colony. The air was cool, and the stars above twinkled faintly through the haze. Everyone was quiet, lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Mia broke the silence. "What happens if we fail?" she asked softly, her voice barely audible over the crackling flames. No one answered right away. Jake stared into the fire, his expression unreadable. Laura glanced at him, then spoke up. "We don't fail," she said firmly. "Because failing isn't an option." Mia nodded, though doubt lingered in her eyes. What if the Virak are smarter than we think? What if they figure out how to fight back?" "They already have," Jake replied, his tone grim. "That's why we can't stop. If we do, they'll keep coming. They'll keep hunting us until there's nothing left." The conversation ended there, but the question hung in the air like smoke from the dying fire. None of them slept well that night. The next morning, reports came in of another Virak sighting near the edge of the forest. This time, the creature had been spotted close to one of the colony's supply routes, a narrow path used to transport resources between settlements. Jake saw it as an opportunity to test the team's readiness. Against Laura's protests, he decided to lead them into the field. "Stay sharp," Jake instructed, as they moved cautiously through the trees. "Stick together, and remember your training. We're not here to kill, it's about control. If we can drive it away, that's a win." The forest was eerily quiet, the kind of stillness that made every sound seem louder than it should. Twigs snapped underfoot, and leaves rustled in the breeze. The team stayed close, their weapons at the ready. Laura scanned the area constantly, her eyes darting from shadow to shadow. Then, without warning, the silence shattered. A deafening roar echoed through the trees, sending birds scattering into the sky. The Virak appeared suddenly, bursting into the clearing with terrifying speed. Its massive form loomed over the group, its glowing red eyes locking onto Jake. "Now!" Jake shouted, raising his pulse driver. The team reacted instantly, firing coordinated bursts of energy at the creature. The first shot struck its chest, causing it to stagger backward. But unlike before, the Virak didn't retreat. Instead, it roared again, charging straight at them. "Fall back!" Laura yelled, pulling Mia and Frank behind a fallen tree. Jake held his ground, firing repeatedly, as the Virak closed the distance. Each shot slowed it down, but not enough to stop it completely. When the creature lunged, Jake dove to the side, rolling across the ground and coming up behind it. He aimed carefully, targeting its hind legs. Two quick bursts sent the Virak crashing to the forest floor, writhing in pain. The team regrouped, keeping their weapons trained on the beast as it struggled to rise. "Don't let it recover," Jake ordered, his voice tight with urgency. The team fired again, driving the Virak deeper into the forest until it finally retreated, disappearing into the shadows. Breathing heavily, the team lowered their weapons. Adrenaline coursed through their veins, leaving them shaken but alive. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Mia let out a shaky laugh, breaking the tension. "We did it," she said, her voice trembling with relief. "We actually did it." Jake nodded, though his expression remained serious. "For now," he said, "but this isn't over. Not by a long shot. Laura approached him, her face pale but resolute. You were right, she admitted. We can fight back, but Jake, this changes things. The Virak aren't just reacting anymore, they're watching us, learning. Jake met her gaze, understanding the weight of her words. Then we'd better learn faster, he said, because next time, they won't make the same mistakes. As the team returned to the colony, the reality of their situation settled. The Virak weren't just predators, they were survivors, adapting to every threat humanity threw at them. Winning wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't come without cost. But for the first time, the settlers felt a glimmer of hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, they could carve out a future on Arendor after all. The victory against the Virak near the supply route brought a surge of confidence to the colony. For the first time in years, the settlers felt like they had a fighting chance. Jake Monroe's leadership and the Pulse driver's success inspired many to believe that humanity could stand its ground on Arendor, but beneath the surface of newfound hope, cracks began to form. Laura Hayes tried to temper the growing optimism, reminding everyone that one win didn't mean the war was over. We got lucky, she said during a meeting with the team. The Virak weren't prepared for us this time. Next time they will be. Her words fell on deaf ears. The settlers were eager to celebrate their small triumph, clinging to it as proof that life on Arendor could improve. Supplies flowed more freely now, thanks to the secured route, and people started venturing farther from the safety of the colony. It was as if the fear that had gripped them for so long had loosened its hold, at least temporarily. But Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He replayed the encounter in his mind, analyzing every detail. The Virak had been faster, stronger, and more aggressive than ever before. Its movements had seemed almost calculated, as if it were testing them. And then there was the way it had retreated, not out of weakness but with purpose, disappearing into the forest like a shadow slipping away. Jake shared his concerns with Eli Carter, who listened intently while tinkering with another pulse driver prototype. You're right to worry, Eli said, finally setting down his tools. These creatures aren't just reacting anymore. They're planning, adapting. Every time we push them, they push back harder. Jake nodded grimly. Then we need to stay ahead of them. Keep improving the weapons, keep training the team. We can't afford to slow down. Eli sighed, rubbing his temples. Just remember, Jake, there's a fine line between standing your ground and picking a fight you can't win. Jake didn't respond. He knew Eli was right, but he also knew they couldn't afford to hesitate. The Virak were evolving, becoming bolder and more dangerous. If humanity wanted a future on Arendor, they would have to adapt just as quickly. The next few weeks passed in a blur of preparation. The team trained relentlessly, honing their skills and refining their tactics. Laura pushed them harder than ever, drilling scenarios into their heads until they could react without thinking. She worked closely with Mia, helping the younger woman overcome her nerves and build confidence. Frank, meanwhile, embraced his role as the team's powerhouse, wielding his heavy pulse driver with surprising precision. Despite their progress, tensions within the colony continued to rise. Some settlers argued that the team should take the fight directly to the Virak, launching raids deep into the forest to thin their numbers. Others believed they should focus on defense, fortifying the settlement and avoiding unnecessary risks. The debate grew heated, dividing families and friends. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jake found Laura sitting alone outside the colony's perimeter. She stared into the distance, her rifle resting across her lap. Her expression was troubled, distant. You okay? Jake asked, sitting beside her. Laura hesitated before answering. I don't know, she admitted. Sometimes I feel like we're playing with fire, pushing too hard, too fast. What happens if the Virak decide we're more trouble than we're worth? What then? Jake leaned back, staring up at the stars. We do what we've always done, he said quietly. Survive. Laura turned to look at him, her eyes searching his face. And if surviving means leaving, would you be willing to walk away? Jake didn't answer right away. The question weighed heavily on him, forcing him to confront doubts he'd buried deep inside. Finally, he shook his head. "No," he said firmly. "Not yet. Not until we've tried everything else." Laura sighed, looking away. "I hope you're right." The following morning, disaster struck. A massive Virak attacked the colony itself, smashing through the outer walls with terrifying ease. Its roar echoed through the settlement, sending settlers scrambling for cover. Children cried and adults shouted orders, trying to organize a defense. Jake and the team sprang into action, rushing to meet the threat head-on. Armed with pulse drivers, they formed a line in front of the main hall where many settlers had taken refuge. Laura stood beside Jake, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "Stay focused," she ordered. "Aim for the legs and shoulders. Slow it down, then go for the head." The Virak charged, its massive form casting a long shadow over the colony. Jake raised his weapon, firing a concentrated burst at its chest. The impact staggered the creature, but it kept coming, undeterred. The team fired again and again, driving it backward step by step. When the Virak lunged, Jake dove to the side, narrowly avoiding its claws. Rolling to his feet, he adjusted his aim and fired 2 quick shots. One to its shoulder and another to its leg. The creature collapsed with a thunderous crash, writhing in pain. But it wasn't dead. Its glowing red eyes burned with fury as it struggled to rise. "Now!" Jake shouted, sprinting forward. He aimed carefully, targeting the Virak's head. The final shot connected, piercing its thick skull and silencing its roar forever. For a moment, the colony was eerily quiet. Then cheers erupted from the settlers, echoing through the damaged buildings. Jake stood over the fallen beast, breathing heavily. His hands trembled as he lowered the pulse driver, the weight of what he'd done sinking in. Laura approached him, her expression unreadable. "You did it," she said softly. "You saved us." Jake shook his head, his voice barely above a whisper. "No, we did it. Together." As dawn broke, the settlers began cleaning up the wreckage. The attack had left scars, both physical and emotional, but it also strengthened their resolve. For the first time, they truly understood what they were capable of when they worked as one. Later that day, Jake and Laura walked through the forest together, surveying the damage caused by the battle. Trees lay broken and uprooted, their branches scattered across the ground. The once pristine landscape bore the marks of humanity's struggle for survival. "What happens now?" Laura asked, breaking the silence. Jake glanced at her, then at the horizon. "We rebuild," he said. "But this time we do it differently. We can't keep treating Arendor like it belongs to us. If we want to survive here, we need to learn how to coexist, with the planet and with the Virak." Laura nodded slowly, understanding the truth in his words. "It won't be easy," she said. "No," Jake agreed, "but nothing worth doing ever is." As they made their way back to the colony, the memory of the Virak served as a constant reminder of the dangers of hubris and the importance of respect for each other and for the world they shared. The road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time Jake felt hopeful about the future. The aftermath of the Virak attack left the colony in a state of reflection. The settlers had survived, but the cost was high. Buildings lay in ruins, crops were trampled, and the sense of safety they had briefly enjoyed was shattered. Jake Monroe stood at the edge of the settlement, staring at the destruction. His hands were calloused from days of rebuilding, but his mind was restless. He couldn't stop thinking about what Laura had said, that humanity needed to learn how to coexist with Arendor, not conquer it. Laura Hayes joined him, carrying 2 cups of warm tea. She handed one to Jake without a word, sensing his mood. They stood side by side, watching as settlers worked together to repair the damage. Children played cautiously among the debris, their laughter mingling with the sounds of hammers and saws. Life was slowly returning to normal, but the scars of the battle remained. "You've been quiet," Laura said finally, breaking the silence. "What's on your mind?" Jake sighed, sipping his tea. "I keep thinking about what you said before, about coexisting. I know you're right, but how do we even start?" The Virak aren't just going to leave us alone. Laura nodded thoughtfully. No, they won't. But maybe coexistence doesn't mean peace right away. Maybe it means finding a balance, learning when to fight and when to step back. Jake turned to look at her, his brow furrowed. Balance is easier said than done. Every time we push, they push back harder. And if we don't push, they'll take everything. I know, Laura admitted. But maybe there's another way. We've been treating the Virak like enemies, but what if they're more than that? What if they're just trying to survive, like us? Jake didn't answer immediately. He thought about the Virak he'd faced, their intelligence, their adaptability, their sheer determination to protect their territory. Could they really see them as something other than monsters? Before he could respond, Frank approached, interrupting their conversation. We found something, he said urgently. You need to come see this. Jake and Laura exchanged glances, then followed Frank into the forest. The journey took them deeper than they'd gone before, past fallen trees and scorched earth left behind by the recent battle. When they arrived, they found Mia crouched beside a series of strange markings etched into the ground. They looked deliberate, patterns carved into the dirt surrounded by scattered bones and broken tools. What is this? Jake asked, kneeling for a closer look. Mia shrugged, her voice tinged with awe. I don't know. It looks like some kind of trap, or maybe a warning. Eli Carter arrived moments later, his eyes widening as he examined the markings. These aren't random, he said after a moment. They're too precise. Someone, or something, made these intentionally. Jake frowned, standing up. You think the Virak did this? It's possible, Eli replied. We already know they're smart. This could be proof they're capable of planning ahead. Laura stepped forward, her expression thoughtful. If they're leaving signs, maybe they're trying to communicate. Or lure us into a trap, Jake countered, his tone cautious. Maybe both, Laura said softly. Either way, we can't ignore it. The group debated what to do next. Some argued they should leave the markings alone, avoiding further provocation. Others believed they should investigate, hoping to uncover clues about the Virak's behavior. In the end, Jake decided they needed answers. Answers that might help prevent future attacks. Over the next few days, the team returned to the site repeatedly, studying the markings and searching for patterns. Each visit revealed new details. Claw marks on nearby trees, trails leading deeper into the forest, even faint traces of movement caught on camera traps. Slowly, a picture began to emerge. The Virak weren't just predators, they were strategists, using the environment to their advantage. One evening, as the team reviewed footage around a campfire, Mia pointed out something unusual. Look at this, she said, rewinding the video. See how they move? They're not just wandering, they're patrolling. Jake leaned closer, studying the screen. Sure enough, the Virak appeared to be following specific paths, almost like guards protecting a perimeter. They're marking their territory, he realized aloud. This isn't random aggression, it's defense. Laura nodded, her expression serious. Which means we're encroaching on their land. If we want to avoid conflict, we need to respect their boundaries. The realization hit everyone hard. For years, the settlers had viewed Arendor as theirs, to claim, never considering that they might be trespassing. The Virak weren't invaders. They were defenders, fighting to protect their home. Armed with this understanding, Jake proposed a bold plan. Establish clear borders between the colony and the Virak's territory. It wouldn't be easy. Some settlers would resist giving up valuable land. But it was the only way to reduce tensions. With Laura's support, he presented the idea to the colony, explaining the importance of compromise. Not everyone agreed. Arguments erupted, with some settlers accusing Jake of weakness and others praising his vision. In the end, a vote was held, and the majority sided with Jake. Work began immediately to construct barriers along the designated border, using reinforced materials to create a visible line between human and Virak territory. As the project progressed, the team continued monitoring the Virak's movements. To their surprise, the creatures seemed to respond positively to the changes. Attacks became less frequent, and encounters grew less hostile. It was as if the Virak understood and accepted the settlers' efforts to share the planet. Months passed, and the colony began to thrive once more. Crops flourished, trade routes reopened, and a sense of stability returned. The settlers learned to live within their limits, respecting the natural rhythms of Arendor. Even Jake felt a renewed sense of purpose, knowing they had found a way to survive without destroying the world around them. One evening, as the sun set over the horizon, Jake and Laura walked along the newly established border. The forest stretched out before them, alive with the sounds of wildlife. Somewhere in the distance, a low growl echoed faintly, a reminder of the Virak's presence. "You think this will last?" Laura asked, her voice soft. Jake smiled, though his expression was tinged with uncertainty. "I hope so, but even if it doesn't, we've proven something important, that we can adapt, that we can change." Laura nodded, squeezing his hand, gently. "That's all any of us can do." Together they stood in silence, watching as the stars began to appear in the twilight sky. The road ahead would still be challenging, but for the first time, Jake felt hopeful, not just for himself, but for everyone who called Arendor home.